Ever wanted a bike that looked like a Tupperware container or a plastic-wrapped spaceship? Sometimes Japanese motorcycle design felt like an Italian fever dream gone wrong. These models were the awkward teenagers of the motorcycling world. They were too expensive, too weird, and often too brown to be loved. Let's roast the 13 most bizarre-looking flops that died so today's bikes could be as exciting as a microwave. First on the list, Kawasaki H2 Mach 4. 74 horsepower bolted to a frame made of hope and good intentions. That was the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 in 1972. A bike built when safety regulations were friendly suggestions. Kawasaki's engineering philosophy was make it fast first, figure out the rest never. The 748cc two-stroke triple made power like a light switch. Nothing below 5,000 RPM, then everything at once. The problem was the double tubular steel cradle frame had the structural integrity of a pool noodle. It flexed so much during hard acceleration that the front wheel would go light and start hunting for traction it couldn't find. In corners, the frame twisted laterally, which at high speeds created what riders called the death wobble. Kawasaki's solution to stopping a 450-pound missile doing 100 miles per hour was a single front disc and a rear drum. The brakes worked exactly as well as that sounds. The Injectalube oil system was set to maximum output from the factory to prevent engine seizure, which meant it smoked like a chemical fire and got 20 to 25 miles per gallon on a good day. The H2 earned the Widowmaker reputation because it delivered on the promise: 55.5-inch wheelbase, rear weight bias, and a motor making more power than the chassis could handle. It was the fastest way to find out if your life insurance was current. Kawasaki learned that horsepower without a frame to manage it just makes for spectacular crashes. Second, the Suzuki RE5. Suzuki bet the entire company on the rotary engine and almost lost. The 1974 RE5 was supposed to be the future of motorcycling, with its Wankel rotary delivering turbine-smooth power and looking like it arrived from another dimension. Instead, it nearly bankrupted Suzuki and taught the industry that sometimes the future should stay there. The 497cc single-rotor engine needed two separate cooling systems, one for oil and one for water, because apparently one wasn't complicated enough. The real killer was the apex seals. Early ceramic technology couldn't handle the stress, and when those seals failed, the entire engine imploded. No rebuild, no repair, just a $400 complete engine replacement in 1974 money. That's over $2,000 today for a motor that was integrated as a single unit and impossible to fix any other way. Then there was the styling. Giorgetto Giugiaro designed it, which sounds impressive until you see the cylindrical instrument cluster and taillight that made the bike look like a confused UFO. The market took one look at the 573-pound spaceship, the polarizing design, and the price tag Suzuki needed to recover their R&D costs, and collectively said, no thanks. Suzuki eventually slashed the price in half just to clear inventory before pulling the plug in 1976. The RE5 lasted 4 years in production and decades in the corporate memory as a very expensive lesson about betting everything on unproven technology. Next, we have the Honda NR750. $50,000 for a motorcycle in 1992, $60,000 if the dealer was feeling ambitious. That bought you a Honda with oval pistons, 32 valves, titanium connecting rods, and performance that wasn't any better than the $8,000 Fireblade sitting right next to it in the showroom. The math didn't math. The NR750 started as Honda's decade-long temper tantrum about two-stroke engines dominating Grand Prix racing. They refused to build a two-stroke, so instead they created oval pistons that let them fit 8 valves per cylinder. Technically it was a V4, but functionally it was a V8 crammed into the space of 4 cylinders. This required titanium rods, magnesium wheels, and carbon fiber bodywork just to make the engineering work. The result was 125 horsepower that cost more than most people's cars. Only 300 street units were ever built because Honda couldn't find anyone willing to pay supercar money for motorcycle performance they could get elsewhere for a tenth of the price. Regular dealerships couldn't service it. Parts were impossible to source. The bike was a corporate flag-waving exercise that succeeded in inspiring Ducati's 916 design while making Honda exactly zero profit. The NR750 is what happens when engineering pride meets market reality and loses spectacularly. Honda spent over a decade developing technology that customers neither wanted nor needed at a price nobody would pay. The lesson cost millions. The legacy is mostly just the Ducati it accidentally inspired. At number 4, Yamaha TX750. Yamaha's engineers in 1973 had a brilliant idea. Take a parallel twin, bore it out to 750cc, and add an omni-phase balancer system to smooth out the vibrations. What could go wrong? Turns out everything that could go wrong did. The balancer worked by using chain-driven counterweights positioned to cancel out the engine's natural shake. Unfortunately, those counterweights also whipped the engine oil into a froth at highway RPM. Who doesn't want a fresh latte while cruising at 70 miles per hour? Aerated oil is great for cappuccinos, terrible for lubrication. The oil lost its ability to form a protective film on the bearings, which led to rapid wear, eventual seizure, and very angry customers showing up at Yamaha dealerships, demanding answers that Yamaha didn't have. Despite having an oil cooler and a fancy instrument cluster, the TX750 couldn't escape its fundamental engineering flaw. The bike's reputation for unreliability spread faster than Yamaha could build them. Worse, Yamaha had to do something almost unheard of in Japanese corporate culture. They had to publicly admit they made a mistake and recall the bikes. The TX750 was quietly withdrawn after a short production run. Yamaha didn't attempt another large displacement parallel twin for years, choosing instead to focus on 3-cylinder and 4-cylinder layouts that didn't turn oil into foam. It remains a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to reinvent a proven engine layout with a balancer system that creates more problems than it solves. Sometimes the old vibrations were better than the new solutions. And then we have Suzuki TL1000S. Suzuki built a 996cc V-twin in 1997 that made 125 horsepower with mid-range torque that could snap your neck. The engine was genuinely brilliant. Then they mounted the rear damper right next to the exhaust pipe. Great decision if you enjoy suspension that works differently every ride. Heat from the exhaust would cook the damper oil during hard riding. The 1415mm wheelbase was short for aggressive handling, which meant the bike got ridden hard, which meant the exhaust got hot, which meant the damper oil temperature climbed until its damping characteristics changed completely. What started as predictable suspension turned into a lottery. Pull out of your driveway and the rear end feels perfect. 20 minutes on the highway in July and suddenly the whole bike is shaking itself into a tank slapper at 70 miles per hour. Suzuki issued a recall to bolt steering dampers onto every bike as standard equipment. That was their solution to a heat-soaked rear suspension. Add weight to the front, increase steering effort, and kill the flickability that was supposed to be the entire point of the short wheelbase. The Band-Aid didn't work. Riders didn't trust it. Used prices collapsed. Production of the S model ended, while Suzuki shifted focus to the safer SV1000 and the fully fared TL1000R. The Widowmaker stigma stuck. You can still find TL1000S bikes for cheap, because nobody wants to be the next person to discover what happens when a damper cooks itself at speed. Number 6. Yamaha GTS 1000. Yamaha's 1993 attempt to replace telescopic forks with hub-center steering. The Omega chassis separated steering forces from suspension forces. The bike stayed perfectly level under hard braking instead of diving forward like every other motorcycle on the planet. Zero fork flex in corners. It was objectively better in every measurable way. The market rejected it completely because it looked weird. The front end looked like it was designed by someone who'd never seen a motorcycle before. Bulky, unconventional, strange. Without traditional forks, the GTS had this appearance that screamed engineering experiment instead of production motorcycle. The hub center system cost significantly more to produce, which made the GTS more expensive than the FJR 1100. It also added considerable weight from all the extra linkage and structural requirements. City riding felt like piloting a garbage truck through traffic. None of that mattered as much as the simple fact that it looked wrong. Motorcycle buyers are conservative. They wanted bikes that looked like bikes with forks sticking out the front. The GTS looked like a prop from a science fiction movie. Anti-lock brakes and electronic fuel injection couldn't overcome the aesthetic problem. Sales were terrible. Yamaha kept making them for a few years, watching inventory pile up before admitting defeat and discontinuing production. You see more GTS 1000 at vintage bike shows now than you ever did in showrooms when they were new. Riders chose familiar fork dive over objectively better performance because the better performance came wrapped in a package that looked too different. Coming in at number 7, Honda Pacific Coast PC 800. 9 years of Honda trying to sell car drivers on a motorcycle. The pitch was simple. Wrap it in plastic bodywork, add a trunk that opens like a sedan, and make maintenance as easy as possible. The target demographic looked at it and bought cars anyway. Traditional riders walked past it in dealerships without slowing down. 7 panels. That's how many you had to remove to access the battery on a bike marketed specifically on convenience and ease of ownership. Want to check if your battery terminals are corroded? Set aside an afternoon and grab your screwdriver collection. 4 more panels came off for spark plug changes. The plastic bodywork covered everything and made simple routine maintenance into an engineering project. Between 1989 and 1998, Honda kept trying to convince people this was what they wanted. It cost $7,700 in '89, which was over $1,000 more than the faster and more capable Kawasaki Concours that didn't require disassembly to perform basic maintenance. Peak sales hit 7,000 units in year one. The 1990 recession cut that in half. Honda gave up, then tried again in '94, hoping the market had changed. It hadn't. Sales never broke 1,000 units per year. Production finally ended in '98. The PC 800 sits in garages now owned by people who thought they wanted car-like convenience on two wheels and discovered they just wanted a car. Honda spent 9 years learning that making motorcycles more like cars doesn't attract car drivers. It just annoys everyone. 8th on the list, Honda DN01. $14,599 in 2009, 60 horsepower. Those two numbers explain most of why almost nobody bought one. The rest involves an identity crisis and ATV parts. Honda called it Dream New and decided to invent a new category by combining sport bike styling with cruiser ergonomics and a scooter transmission. The result looked confused in the showroom and performed worse on the road. The human-friendly transmission was a continuously variable unit shared with exactly one other Honda product, a four-wheel ATV. When it broke, which it did, you needed quad parts to fix your premium motorcycle. Call your local Honda dealer and explain your $14,000 bike needs ATV transmission components. Watch them stare at you like you're speaking another language. Check the aftermarket. Find nothing because nobody made parts for a bike almost nobody bought. That was the ownership experience Honda created. It weighed as much as a touring bike, made the power of an entry-level standard, cost more than most people's used cars. Scooter buyers found it too big. Sport bike buyers laughed at 60 horsepower for that price. Cruiser buyers didn't understand what they were looking at. Honda sold almost nothing globally before quietly discontinuing production. The DN01 disappeared fast. You'll see more GTS 1000s at bike nights than DN01s because at least the Yamaha had a clear purpose even if people didn't buy it. The Honda was just expensive confusion with an ATV transmission. At number 9, Suzuki GV1200 Madura. The mid-80s muscle bike war was brutal. Yamaha had the VMAX with its industrial look and 145 horsepower. Honda had the V65 Magna with classic cruiser styling. Suzuki showed up with the Madura, an 82-degree V4 with hydraulic lifters and a design that looked confused. The market responded by buying everything except the Madura. The engine was technically advanced. Suzuki avoided the camwear issues that plagued early Magnus by using a different V4 configuration. On paper, it made 117 horsepower. On a dyno, it put down 89 horsepower at the rear wheel, which was significantly less than the VMAX and slightly less than the Magna. In a horsepower war, showing up with less power than your competitors is how you lose fast. The real problem was aesthetic. The VMAX looked brutal and purposeful, like it wanted to fight. The Magna looked like a proper muscle cruiser with heritage. The Madura looked like a parts bin special that couldn't decide if it was a sport bike or a cruiser. In a segment where visual impact sells bikes faster than spec sheets, the Madura had the presence of beige wallpaper. Production lasted 2 years. Only 5,099 units were built before Suzuki gave up. The Madura became a forgotten footnote in the 80s horsepower wars, remembered mostly by the few people who bought one and the many more who walked past it in the showroom on their way to test ride a VMAX. Number 10. Yamaha XZ550 Vision. Yamaha's 1982 attempt at a sophisticated middleweight V-twin with liquid cooling, dual overhead cams, and 4 valves per cylinder. Specs that should have made it a winner, except Yamaha left casting sand in the carburetors at the factory and shipped bikes that stumbled so badly at low speeds they were almost unrideable. The Vision stumble became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Yamaha's dual downdraft Mikuni carburetors had off-idle bleed holes that were supposed to be clear. Instead, many of them still had manufacturing sand trapped inside from the casting process. Nobody caught it at the factory. The bikes shipped exactly like that. Customers discovered their brand new motorcycles couldn't hold a steady throttle at parking lot speeds without lurching and coughing like they were about to die. Imagine trying to navigate a parking lot on a bike that felt like it was constantly on the verge of stalling. Then there was the heat. The 70-degree V-twin collected enough heat under the gas tank to boil fuel and cause vapor lock on hot days. The electrical system was a disaster, with stators and regulator rectifiers failing constantly. Starter clutch bolts would back out during operation and cause catastrophic engine damage that turned expensive fast. Yamaha eventually slashed the price in half just to clear inventory before discontinuing the Vision in 1983 after only 2 years of production. The Vision taught Yamaha that advanced specs mean absolutely nothing if quality control doesn't catch casting sand in critical components before bikes leave the factory. Coming in at 11, Kawasaki ZX 750 Turbo. The early 80s saw a brief insane period when Japanese manufacturers decided turbocharging motorcycles was the future. Kawasaki's 1983 GPZ 750 Turbo was arguably the best of a bad idea, which is like being the tallest building in a town with no tall buildings. The GPZ 750 Turbo placed the turbocharger directly in front of the engine, reducing lag compared to rivals from Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki. It was the fastest production bike at launch, making 11.2 psi of boost. The problem was everything that came with forced induction. Oil changes every 1,500 miles. Mandatory cooldown periods before shutting off the engine to prevent turbo bearing failure. Complexity that required specific knowledge most mechanics didn't have, and most owners didn't want to deal with. By the time Kawasaki perfected the turbo motorcycle, they also released the GPZ 900R Ninja, which offered similar performance with none of the maintenance headaches or heat management issues. The market looked at both bikes and chose simplicity every time. Why deal with turbo cooldown periods when you could just buy a bigger, naturally aspirated engine that made the same power? The turbo era died almost as fast as it started. Only 15% of GPZ 750 turbos survived by 1995 because most got scrapped when the turbos failed and owners discovered replacement parts cost more than the bikes were worth. Kawasaki learned that complexity for its own sake doesn't sell when simpler solutions exist right next to it in the showroom. Number 12. Honda CB500T. In the mid-70s, Honda looked at nostalgia for British parallel twins and thought they could capitalize on it. The 1975 CB500T was their attempt. It failed because Honda gave customers all the disadvantages of old British bikes without any of the character that made people remember them fondly in the first place. The CB500T was based on the CB450 engine bored out to 498cc in a way that left it fundamentally unbalanced. The vibrations were described by every review as teeth-chattering. At idle, it shook. At highway speed, it shook worse. The styling was uninspired with a drab brown and tan color scheme that looked dated the day it was released. The bike was both heavier and slower than the CB450 it was meant to replace, which is an impressive achievement in the wrong direction. Honda already had the CB550 4-cylinder in their lineup, which was smoother, faster, more reliable, and actually pleasant to ride for more than an hour. The CB500T offered none of those qualities. It vibrated like a paint mixer, leaked oil like a British twin but without the soul, the exhaust note, or any of the nostalgic charm that made people tolerate those flaws in the original bikes. The CB500T was quickly overshadowed and forgotten. Honda learned that nostalgia only works if you capture what made the original bikes special. Copying just the problems while missing the character results in a motorcycle nobody wants to own or ride. Dead last, and maybe the worst idea on this entire list, Honda CB750A Hondomatic. Honda looked at the legendary CB750 in 1976 and thought, you know what this needs? An automatic transmission. Take one of the most iconic motorcycles ever built and add a torque converter from a Civic. Genius move. The Hondomatic used a fluid torque converter that was heavy, inefficient, and turned the 750cc engine into something with the acceleration of a riding lawnmower pulling a trailer. The 2-speed transmission gave you low gear and high gear. That's it. No third gear, no fourth, no fifth, no way to actually match engine speed to what you were doing. Need to pass someone on the highway? Better start planning about a mile back and pray they're not in a hurry either. Honda's entire pitch was that shifting scares non-riders. Remove the clutch and the gearbox, and suddenly everyone will buy motorcycles. The people too intimidated to shift stayed home anyway. Experienced riders took one test ride, felt the sluggish response, and walked back inside to buy the manual version that didn't weigh more and make less power for no reason. Production lasted 3 years before Honda gave up in '78. The Hondomatic proved that making motorcycles easier to ride doesn't attract people who don't want to ride. It just makes bikes that the people who do want to ride won't buy. You see them at vintage shows now where owners explain to confused onlookers why anyone thought this was a good idea. Nobody has a good answer. 13 spectacular disasters that cost Japanese manufacturers billions. These failures are why modern bikes are reliable enough to be boring. If you know someone shopping for a bike who thinks newer is always better, send them this. Ride safe and see you in the next video.